She is running, bare feet, frozen ground, a forest so dark she cannot see what is in front of her, only that something ahead of her is pulling at her chest, like a hook buried behind her ribs, and whatever is on the other end of it is not letting go. She does not remember leaving the house. She does not remember crossing the yard or passing through the gate or entering the tree line. One moment she was asleep in her bed beside her husband of 18 years, and the next moment she was here, in the dark, moving at a speed no 40-year-old woman should be capable of, her nightgown torn at the shoulder, her feet bleeding against the stones and roots of a forest floor she has never walked in her life. And she cannot stop. She has tried. God help her, she has tried. She told her legs to stop, and they kept moving. She told her body to turn around, and it kept going forward. Whatever is driving her through these trees right now, it is not coming from her mind. It is coming from somewhere older than her mind. The veins are rising beneath her skin, dark and thick and moving, pressing upward like roots pushing through soil after a long winter underground. The skin itself is rippling, shifting, like the surface of deep water when something enormous stirs beneath it. She opens her mouth to scream, and the sound that tears out of her throat is not the sound of a woman. It rises above the trees. It swallows the clearing. It reaches the moon above her like it has been trying to reach it for 40 years. And the forest goes completely silent. Every creature, every rustle, every breath of wind through the ancient branches. Silence. Like the forest recognizes what just made that sound. Like the forest has been waiting too. She was 40 years old, and she had absolutely no idea, not even the faintest shadow of a clue, that the sound that just tore itself out of her body was the sound her bloodline had been trying to make since the night she was born. That the forest had recognized her 3 weeks before the full moon. Ashvale, a town so small and so quiet that most maps do not bother to include it, tucked into the edge of an ancient forest, in the way that certain towns are, not built beside nature, but built inside it, as though the trees allowed it, as though the land made a single careful exception and permitted these streets and these houses and these ordinary human lives to exist within its borders, on the condition that nobody asked too many questions about what lived in the dark beyond the tree line. It is a beautiful town, the kind of beautiful that does not announce itself. Cobblestone streets that have been worn smooth by 100 years of footsteps, a bakery on the corner of Marin Street that has been run by the same family for 3 generations, and whose smell of fresh bread and cinnamon reaches halfway down the block every morning at 6. A library with tall, narrow windows and ivy growing up the east wall that turns the... A good house. A lived-in house. A house that has a slightly crooked front gate that Callum has been meaning to fix for 3 years, and a window box full of herbs that Seraphine tends every Sunday morning in her dressing gown, with a cup of coffee going cold on the front step. A house with muddy trainers by the back door, and a corkboard in the kitchen covered in school notices and shopping lists, and a photograph from a holiday 2 summers ago, where everyone is squinting into the sun and laughing at something just off camera. A home. And inside it, Seraphine Voss. She is 40 years old, and she does not look it, though she would laugh and argue with you if you said so, the way women do when they are genuinely comfortable in their own skin, and do not need the compliment, but appreciate the kindness of it. She has dark hair that she wears up during the week and down on weekends. Eyes that are, and people have always struggled to describe this, not quite one color. Green in the morning, something closer to gold in certain lights. Her students think she is beautiful in the way that good teachers always are, not because of how she looks, but because of how she pays attention. Because when Seraphine Voss looks at you, you feel as though she is actually seeing you. All of you. The parts you show.
And every year, without fail, the unit that generates the most discussion, the most wide eyes, the most students leaning forward in their chairs, is the week on shapeshifter folklore. Werewolves, specifically. She teaches it beautifully, academically, with the calm, detached precision of a woman who finds the subject intellectually fascinating and nothing more. She traces the mythology from its earliest roots, the ancient Greek legend of Lycaon, the king who served the gods human flesh and was transformed into a wolf as punishment. She moves through Norse mythology, through medieval European folklore, through the werewolf trials of the 16th century, where men and women were executed for confessing. Under torture, she always reminds her students, always under torture, to transforming under the full moon. She talks about what the myth represents, the fear of the animal within, the terror of losing control, the ancient human anxiety about the thing that lives inside us that civilization has not quite managed to tame. Her students love this lesson. One of them, a boy named Marcus who sits at the back and has never voluntarily contributed to a class discussion about anything, once raised his hand during the werewolf unit and spoke for 4 uninterrupted minutes about the symbolism of the full moon as a mirror for the unconscious mind. Seraphine had looked at him with genuine delight and said, "Marcus." She laughs. She hangs up her coat. She goes into the kitchen and puts the kettle on, and for a moment, just a moment, she stands at the kitchen window and looks out at the back garden in the dark and the forest beyond the fence at the end of it, and feels nothing. Nothing at all. Just the ordinary, comfortable nothing of a Tuesday evening at home. She turns away from the window. She makes tea. Callum Voss has been in love with his wife for 20 years. 2 of those before they married, 18 of those since, and he would tell you without hesitation that she is the best thing that has ever happened to him, and that he has never once regretted a single day of their life together. He would also tell you, if you asked him very directly, if you caught him in a rare, honest moment, perhaps late at night over a glass of something, that there is a part of Seraphine he has never been able to reach. Not for lack of trying, not for lack of love, not because she keeps secrets from him or holds herself back deliberately. They eat at the kitchen table, he and Seraphine, and the distant sound of Rowan's music from upstairs, and Lyra's voice on a video call with a friend, and they talk about his day and her day, and the essay she has to mark, and the planning application that is giving him a headache, and whether they should go to his mother's for Christmas or try to get out of it again this year. Ordinary. Completely, entirely, beautifully ordinary. Rowan Voss is 17 years old, and he runs every morning before sunrise. Not jogging, running. Properly. Hard. The kind of running that serious athletes do. Focused and deliberate, and covering distances that would exhaust most grown men. He is out of the house by 5:15 every morning, regardless of the weather, regardless of whether it is a school day or a weekend, regardless of whether it is raining or frozen or dark as the inside of a closed fist. He has never explained why. Seraphine asked him once, early on when the habit first started at 14, whether he was training for something specific, a team, a competition, a goal. He had looked at her with those serious dark eyes of his and said simply, "It clears my head." And then he had gone back to his breakfast, and that had been the end of the conversation. He is a quiet boy, not unhappy. Lyra Voss is 15 years old, and she draws the way other people breathe, constantly, automatically, as though stopping would be a kind of suffocation. She goes through sketchbooks at a rate that has become a running joke in the family. Callum buys them in bulk from the art supply shop in the next town. They fill a shelf in her bedroom, 30, 40 of them now, spine to spine, a whole library of images that exist nowhere except in Lyra's mind and on these pages. She is talented, genuinely, seriously talented, in the way that some people are at 15, that has nothing to do with lessons or technique, and everything to do with something they were simply born with. Her art teacher has told Seraphine twice, with the careful, measured enthusiasm of someone trying not to raise expectations too high while clearly not being able to help themselves, that Lyra is the most gifted student she has taught in 20 years. But here is the thing about Lyra's sketchbooks that her art teacher does not know. Here is the thing that Seraphine has noticed but not examined too closely, because examining it too closely—
Lyra, she had said carefully, where do these come from? Lyra had looked up from her current page. A new wolf, enormous, silver-furred, sitting at the edge of a tree line staring out at the viewer with eyes that caught the light strangely. My dreams, she said, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. I see them every night. I just draw what I see. Seraphine had put the sketchbook down. She had said, "They're beautiful, sweetheart." And she had left the room and stood in the corridor for a moment with her hand flat against the wall and her heart beating slightly too fast for no reason she could name. She had told herself it was nothing. She is very good at telling herself things are nothing. The strange details accumulate quietly, the way they always do. Not as alarms, not as revelations, but as small, odd moments that get filed away under probably nothing and forgotten about almost immediately. There is the evening she is making dinner, a Tuesday, 3 weeks before everything changes, and she is chopping carrots and the knife slips. It catches the side of her index finger, a clean cut, deep enough that she pulls her hand.
The morning Seraphine walks past, the dog comes to the fence, as always, and stops. It stands completely still. It looks at her. And then, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of a creature making a considered decision, it lies down, flat on the ground, head on its paws, eyes following her as she walks past. She does not see it, because she is looking at her phone. The dog stays lying down until she has turned the corner. There is the afternoon in the staff room when her colleague Janet mentions, in the way that colleagues mention things, offhand, while making coffee, without any particular weight or intention. Do you know, I was just looking at your HR record because we're updating the absence tracking system, and Seraphine, you have literally not taken a single sick day in 15 years. Not one. That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen on a spreadsheet. Seraphine laughs. Good immune system, she says. That is not a good immune system, Janet says. That is something else entirely. They both laugh. It is just a funny thing. A nice thing, even. Nothing to examine. And then there is the photograph. And then, quietly, without announcement, without drama, the dreams begin. Not the dream from the hook. Not yet. Not that dream. That comes later, when the seal has already begun to fracture, and her blood is already waking up, and the moon is already calling in a voice too loud to sleep through. These dreams are gentle, almost beautiful. She is running through a forest, not in fear, not yet, just running. The way you run in dreams when your legs work perfectly, and the ground is soft beneath you, and the air is clean and cold, and fills your lungs completely, and you feel, in the specific way that only dreams allow, entirely free. She cannot see the moon, but she can feel it. Somewhere above the canopy of trees, somewhere in the sky above this forest she does not recognize, there is a pull, a deep and rhythmic pull, like a tide, like something magnetic, like a sound too low to hear that she can feel in her chest and her bones and the soles of her feet. She runs toward it. She always runs toward it. And then comes the evening that she will remember later, much later, when she understands everything, when the whole story has finally been told to her, and she can look back and see every moment for what it actually was, as the last evening of her ordinary life. A Thursday, the end of October. The sky going down in layers of orange and purple beyond the school car park as she stands at her classroom window after the last lesson of the day. The corridors are emptying, the building going quiet around her in the way school buildings do at the end of a day. The particular exhausted silence of a place that has been full of life for hours and is now slowly exhaling. The sun is going down. And the forest, 3 fields away, past the playing field, past the fence at the edge of the school grounds, the forest is going dark, its edges blurring into the dusk, the trees becoming one solid shape against the last of the light. Seraphine stands at the window and looks at it. And something happens that has never happened before. She does not want to go home. She wants to go into the forest. The want is so sudden and so specific and so completely without rational explanation that she actually takes a step backward from the window, as though she can put physical distance between herself and the feeling. Her heart is going fast. Her hands feel strange, warm and slightly too aware of themselves, the way hands feel when you have been gripping something tightly and then let go. She wants to go into the forest. She parks in the drive. She goes inside. She says hello to Callum. She says hello to Lyra. She goes upstairs and changes out of her work clothes and stands for a moment at the bedroom window, looking out at the back garden and the fence at the end of it and the dark beyond. The feeling is still there. Quieter now, smaller, but still there. Like something that has been called and is waiting to be answered. She pulls the curtains closed. She goes downstairs. She helps with dinner. She is ordinary. She is fine.
The dreams did not stop. She had hoped they would stop. She had told herself, the way she told herself everything that did not have a clean, rational explanation, that they were temporary, a phase, the result of too much marking and too little sleep, and the particular kind of low-level exhaustion that accumulates in a person across 15 years of standing at the front of a classroom, giving pieces of themselves away every single day. She had told herself this with great confidence. The dreams paid no attention. They came every night now, without exception, without mercy. The moment she closed her eyes and crossed the threshold into sleep, she was there, in the forest, already running, always already running, as though sleep was not a rest at all, but a doorway into a version of herself that did not need rest, that did not need anything except the cold air and the dark trees, and the pull, always that pull, deep in her chest, constant and rhythmic, something she had no name for, something that made every nerve in her dreaming body stand at attention as though she were approaching something enormous and important and entirely beyond her waking understanding. She ran toward it every night. She never reached it. She woke every morning gasping, heart pounding, sheets damp, that extraordinary feeling of aliveness crackling through her body for 30 seconds before fading like a coal going dark. And then she was just Seraphine again, tired, confused, lying in the ordinary dark of her ordinary bedroom with her ordinary husband breathing softly beside her. By the second week, she was waking up twice a night. By the third week, she was barely sleeping at all. She was a rational woman. She had always been a rational woman. She believed in what she could see and touch and measure and explain. She believed in the scientific method and peer-reviewed research and the fundamental human capacity to find a sensible answer to any question if you looked hard enough in the right places. So she looked. She sat at the kitchen table after Callum and the children had gone to bed.
Dr. Ellison had been Seraphine's GP for 11 years. She was a small, precise woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the particular manner of a doctor who has seen enough in her career that very little surprises her anymore, which made what happened at Seraphine's appointment all the more remarkable. Seraphine described the dreams, the disrupted sleep, the feeling of physical aliveness on waking, the exhaustion during the day that somehow never quite tipped into the kind of exhaustion that actually slowed her down. She mentioned, almost as an aside, almost as a joke, the cut that had healed before she could find a plaster. Dr. Ellison had listened with her usual composed attention. She had ordered blood work, full panel, everything. She had said she would call with results within the week. She called in 3 days. "Seraphine, I'd like you to come in." Something in her voice made Seraphine put down the essay she was marking and give the phone her complete attention. She went in the following morning. Dr. Ellison sat across the desk from her with a printout of results in her hand and an expression on her face that Seraphine had never seen there before in 11 years of appointments. She looked puzzled, not concerned, not alarmed.
Seraphine looked at her. "Is that bad?" "It's not bad, it's just..." Dr. Ellison set the printout down and took her glasses off and rubbed the bridge of her nose in a way that Seraphine had never seen her do before. "I ran the panel twice. Same results. And there's something else." She picked the paper back up. "Your cell regeneration rate. The markers we use to measure how quickly your body repairs tissue damage at a cellular level. Seraphine, your numbers here are unlike anything I have seen in clinical practice. Your cells are regenerating at a rate I genuinely cannot explain. It is as though your body is..." She stopped. "As though my body is..." "What?" Seraphine asked. Dr. Ellison put her glasses back on, straightened the printout, returned, visibly and with some effort, to being the composed professional she always was. "I'd like to refer you to a specialist, just to be thorough, for the sleep disruption, specifically." Of course. It was a Saturday morning, 2 days after the doctor's appointment, when she went up to the attic. The gutters needed clearing. Callum had been saying this for a month, and she had gone up to find the telescoping gutter brush that she was fairly certain was stored in one of the boxes along the left wall, behind the suitcases, behind the box of Rowan's old school things, and the bag of Lyra's outgrown winter coats that she kept meaning to take to the charity shop. The attic was the organized kind of chaotic. Every house with children has an attic like this, full of the accumulated weight of a family in motion. Everything that has been outgrown or replaced or put aside for later, stored up here in the particular amber of domestic life. She moved through it methodically, pushing boxes aside, checking labels in her own handwriting. And then she saw it. In the far corner of the attic. She did not know what this was. It was old. The wood was dark and dense and smooth, in the way of very old things that have been handled many times over many years. Roughly the size of a shoebox, but heavier looking. Sitting in the corner, as though it had always been there, as though it was simply waiting for her to finally notice it, as though its patience on this particular point was effectively unlimited. And on the lid, burned directly into the wood, deep and deliberate, a symbol. She crouched down and looked at it closely. It was not a letter from any alphabet she recognized. It was not a simple shape. It was intricate and precise and old. Something about it felt old in a way that went beyond the age of the box itself, in a way that suggested the symbol had existed long before anyone thought to put it on this wood. She reached out and touched it. The pads of her fingers rested against the burned lines of the symbol, and something in her chest moved. Not physically, not a pain or a sensation she could point to. Something deeper than that. Something that recognized the symbol the way you recognize a word in a... Seraphine did not recognize the woman, but the woman's eyes. She picked up the photograph and held it closer to the light. The woman's eyes were her eyes. Exactly. Not similar.
Not a family resemblance in the way that distant relatives sometimes share a feature. Exactly her eyes. The particular shape of them. The way they caught light. That quality she had never been able to describe accurately that made people struggle to name their color. Her hands were not entirely steady as she turned the photograph over. On the back, written in ink so faded it was almost gone, in handwriting she did not recognize. Mira. Last Alpha. Ashvale. She set the photograph down very carefully on the table in front of her. She sat with those 3 words for a long moment. Mira. Last Alpha.
And yet, she turned the pages slowly, ran her fingertips along the lines of text, and something happened that she had absolutely no rational framework for. Something in her chest, in the same place that had responded to the symbol on the lid of the box, began to respond to this too. Not understanding, not translation. Something older than either of those things. Like hearing a piece of music you have never consciously heard before and realizing your body already knows every note. Like the text was not speaking to her mind at all, but to something underneath her mind. Open it. She put it down. She sat at the table with the photograph and the journal and the sealed vial arranged in front of her, and she did something she had not done since she was a small child, frightened of something in the dark. She tried to remember. She searched back through every memory she had of this. She would have noticed. She would have remembered. This was not a box you could fail to notice, fail to remember. The symbol on the lid alone would have stopped her in her tracks on any previous occasion she had been up there. This box had not been in her attic. And then it was. And she had absolutely no explanation for how that was possible. She sat alone at her kitchen table in her quiet house on a Saturday morning, with a photograph of a woman with her exact eyes, and a journal written in a language her chest somehow recognized, and a vial of something dark she did not want to examine too closely. And she felt afraid, really properly, cleanly afraid, for the first time in all of this. More afraid than the dreams had made her, more afraid than the healing finger or the strange blood results or the pull toward the forest at dusk. This was different. This was the fear that comes when the ground beneath something you believed was solid turns out to have been hollow all along. She closed the box. She put it on the top shelf of the kitchen cupboard, behind the good plates they only used at Christmas. She called Callum and asked when he would be home. "Couple of hours. You okay?" "Fine," she said. "Completely fine. Drive carefully." She had no memory of drawing a single one of them. She sat in the dark with the notepad in her hands, and she was cold all the way through, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She had been asleep. She had been dreaming of the forest, and her hand had been here, in this room, in this bed, drawing symbols from a language written in a journal that had appeared in her attic in a box she had never seen before, by a woman with her exact eyes, whose name, written in fading ink on the back of a photograph, was Mira. Last Alpha. Ashvale. She put the notepad face down on the bedside table. She lay back down. She did not sleep again until morning. Callum found the notepad on a Thursday. Which was the truth, and also not the whole truth. And she knew it was not the whole truth, and she said it anyway, because the whole truth, the box, the photograph, the journal, the vial, the name on the back of the photograph, was a set of words she did not yet know how to say out loud to the person she loved most in the world, without those words changing everything. Callum looked at her with that careful, patient, loving attention that was so specifically and entirely him. The look that said he knew she was not telling him everything, and that he was choosing to not push because he...
She was making coffee on a Friday morning at 6 when she saw the wolf. Callum was still upstairs. Rowan had already left for his run. She had heard the front door at 5:15, as always. Lyra was asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way of early mornings. Not the quiet of night, but the quiet of a world in the process of waking up, full of small sounds and pale light, and the smell of coffee beginning to fill the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, watching the coffee machine, when something made her look up. Not a sound, not a movement she caught in her peripheral vision. Something else. Something that felt less like a sense and more like a certainty. The sudden, absolute knowledge that she was being watched. She looked out the kitchen window into the back garden. Dawnlight. The garden pale and still. The grass silvered with frost. The fence at the far end. And beyond the fence, the tree line.
Not the way animals look at things. Not with the distracted, surface-level attention of a creature registering a stimulus and calculating a response. This wolf was looking at her the way a person looks at someone they have been searching for, with recognition, with something that... And she knew how this sounded. She was a rational woman who taught literature and believed in things she could explain, with something that felt almost like relief. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked at her, and neither of them moved. She became aware that her heart was not pounding, that her hands were not shaking, that she was not afraid, and that the absence of fear was itself the strangest thing about this moment, because by every rational measure, she should have been afraid. There was a wolf in her garden, a wolf the size of a small horse, looking at her through her kitchen window at 6 in the morning. And she felt recognized. She blinked. Not the way animals look at things. Not with the distracted, surface-level attention of a creature registering a stimulus and calculating a response. This wolf was looking at her the way a person looks at someone they have been searching for, with recognition, with something that... And she knew how this sounded. She was a rational woman who taught literature and believed in things she could explain, with something that felt almost like relief. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked at her, and neither of them moved. She became aware that her heart was not pounding, that her hands were not shaking, that she was not afraid, and that the absence of fear was itself the strangest thing about this moment, because by every rational measure, she should have been afraid. There was a wolf in her garden, a wolf the size of a small horse, looking at her through her kitchen window at 6 in the morning. And she felt recognized. She blinked. The wolf was gone. She almost told him. She was so close to telling him that she could feel the words forming. There was a wolf, Callum, in the garden. Enormous, silver. It was looking at me. It felt like it knew me. I felt like I knew it. I am not afraid, and I don't know why I am not afraid. And I found a box in the attic, and the journal inside it is written in a language I cannot read and cannot stop thinking about. And the woman in the photograph has my eye.
3 nights later, the wolf came back. She was in bed when she felt it. Not heard it, felt it. A change in the quality of the silence outside the house. A shift in the air that reached her even through the walls and the closed windows and the 2 floors between her bedroom and the garden. Something that pressed against her chest from the outside, like a hand placed flat against a door. She got up without waking Callum. She went to the bedroom window and looked out. 3 wolves at the edge of the yard, standing at the fence line where the garden met the tree line. 3 of them, silver gray in the moonlight, absolutely still. Not pacing, not circling, not doing any of the things that animals do when they are uncertain or agitated or driven by hunger. simply standing, watching the house with a focused and patient attention that no animal should have been capable of, and that no amount of rational explanation was going to make feel like anything other than what it was. She stood at the window,
slowly, deliberately, moving with a coordinated silence that suggested not instinct, but decision, as though someone or something had told them exactly where to go and exactly how to move and exactly how much and how little to show. They circled the house once, the whole perimeter, front garden and back, the side passages, the full circumference of the property, in complete and total silence. No howling, no growling, not a single sound. Just the soft movement of enormous silver bodies through the frost-pale dark. And then, the tree line again. They moved back into the forest the way they had come, smoothly, completely, without urgency and without hesitation. And the forest beyond the back garden was quiet, and the wolves did not come back. But she knew they were there. She knew it the way she knew things now, not with her mind, but with something older and deeper than her mind, with the part of her that had been waking up, slowly and inexorably, for weeks. The part that recognized the symbol on the box and responded to the language in the journal, and had not been afraid when the silver wolf looked at her through the kitchen window. That part of her knew the wolves were still out there. It was not frightened of them. She found that the most frightening thing of all. And then the changes began to accelerate. Not gradually, not gently. The way a river that has been flowing quietly for miles suddenly hits a place where the ground drops away and becomes, without warning, without transition, something else entirely. Something faster. Something that does not apologize for its own momentum. The bookshelf beside him, a tall, heavy, solid wood unit that had stood in that corridor for 20 years, tipped. She did not decide to move. Her body moved. It was as simple and as unthinking as that. One moment she was walking down the corridor, and the next moment she was there, her right hand flat against the side of the falling unit, catching it, holding it, completely steady, as though it weighed nothing, as though she had simply reached out and rested her hand against something already still. The corridor went quiet. 20-odd students staring at her. Tyler staring at her from underneath his impossibly tall stack of books, somehow still upright, still clutching them, looking at her with his mouth open. She became aware of her own hand against the wood, of the wood. She stood at the sink and gripped the porcelain with both hands and looked at herself in the mirror, and her heart was hammering so hard and so fast that she could see the pulse in her own throat. 80 kilograms. One hand. Without effort. She looked at her hands. Those perfectly normal hands. The hands Dr. Ellison's tests had revealed were regenerating at a rate she could not explain. The hands that had drawn symbols in the dark from a language she could not consciously read. The hands that had not shaken when a wolf the size of a small horse had looked at her through her kitchen window. She ran the cold tap. She pressed her wrists under it. She breathed. She was passing the bathroom mirror late on a Thursday night, coming back from getting a glass of water, the house dark, the moon outside the bathroom window 3/4 full and rising, when she caught something in the mirror that stopped her. She turned back. She stepped close to the mirror and looked at her own reflection in the moonlight coming through the window. The scar on her collarbone was glowing. Not brightly, not dramatically. A faint, cold silver light, the same silver as the wolves, the same silver as the moon outside the window, emanating from the crescent mark, as though something beneath her skin had caught the moonlight and was holding it. As though the scar was not a mark on the surface of her body, but a window into something below it. She stared at it.
Rowan. And Lyra. Yes. Rowan has been running before sunrise since he was 14. Yes. Something moved across his face that she could not quite name. And then she could. It was the expression of a man who has just had 3 years of small, inexplicable details resolve themselves into a coherent picture. The expression of understanding, arriving, finally, after a long time of almost understanding. Lyra came to her on a Sunday morning. Seraphine was in the kitchen, making breakfast. Eggs, toast, the ordinary architecture of a Sunday morning. When she heard Lyra's door open upstairs, and then footsteps on the stairs that were not Lyra's usual footsteps. Too slow, too careful. The footsteps of someone who has been frightened and is trying to decide how much of it to show. Lyra appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was still in her pajamas, her hair unbrushed, her sketchbook clutched against her chest the way she sometimes held it when she was uncertain. Like armor, like comfort. Like the only familiar thing in an unfamiliar moment.
And Ember was sitting on my chest. Ember, the family cat. A small, independent, deeply undemonstrative tabby who had lived with them for 7 years and who expressed affection approximately twice a year on her own strict terms.
Okay, Seraphine said carefully. She was just sitting there, staring at me. And that was weird, because you know she never does that. But that wasn't the thing. Lyra looked at her. I heard something outside. A lot of things. Like movement. Like a lot of movement. And I went to my window and looked out into the garden and... She stopped. Lyra? There were animals, Mom. In the garden. And on the fence. And in the street. I could see them from my window. Birds, loads of them, just sitting on the fence and the roof of the shed. And there were foxes, 3 of them just standing in the garden. And there was a deer, an actual deer, standing at the back fence looking at the house. And they were all... Lyra looked at her for a moment. The look of a 15-year-old who knows her mother and knows when her mother is giving her the edited version. Okay, Lyra said finally. She picked up her sketchbook. Okay, Mom. She went upstairs. Seraphine stood at the kitchen counter and gripped the edge of it with both hands and looked out the window at the garden. The garden was perfectly ordinary. Frost on the grass, a crow on the fence, the tree line beyond, dark and patient and present as always. Her hands were shaking. She had told Lyra it was nothing. Her hands were shaking. She went to Thessaly that afternoon. Thessaly Wren's shop sat on the far edge of Ashvale's High Street.
She was 52, though she looked both younger and older than that, depending on the light and the moment. Lean and quiet, with long, gray-streaked dark hair she wore loose or in a single braid down her back, and eyes that were, and Seraphine had thought this about Thessaly 100 times without ever examining the thought too closely, ancient. Not old. Ancient, as though they had been observing the world for considerably longer than 52 years of one human life could account for. She was Seraphine's closest friend, had been for 12 years, since the year Roan started primary school and they had met at a school event and discovered they were neighbors, in the specific way of people who live in a small town and have simply never happened to intersect before. They had coffee every week. They knew each other's lives with the comfortable intimacy of genuine long friendship.
All of it. Thessaly listened without interrupting, without asking questions, without any of the exclamations or expressions of disbelief or concern that any normal person, hearing this story for the first time, should have produced. She listened the way someone listens to a story they already know. And that was when Seraphine stopped talking.
The shop was very quiet. The dried herbs hanging in bundles from the low ceiling moved slightly in some current of air. The dark glass bottles on the shelves caught the afternoon light. Seraphine looked at her closest friend of 12 years. "You already knew," she said. It was not a question. "Thessaly." Her voice was very steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "You already knew all of this." Thessaly held her gaze, and something moved across her face. Not guilt, not fear, not the defensive scrambling of someone caught in a lie. Something older and heavier than any of those things. Something that looked, and Seraphine had no other word for it, like a debt coming due.
She went home that evening with her head full and her hands unsteady, and a sensation in her chest like a building after a controlled demolition. All the essential structure still standing, but every internal wall changed, rearranged. The whole interior of her suddenly different from what it had been that morning when she had driven to Thessaly's shop, a woman with questions. She was not yet a woman with answers. Thessaly had begun. She had barely begun. The surface of it, the edges of it, enough to confirm that Seraphine's name and the name on the back of the photograph were not coincidentally the same, and that the box in the attic had not appeared there by accident, and that the words Last Alpha meant exactly what they sounded like they meant. And then Seraphine had needed to stop. She had needed air. She had needed the drive home and the ordinary street, and Callum's car in the drive, and the smell of dinner coming from the kitchen, and Lyra's voice somewhere upstairs, and the particular. And she loved them. She loved them so completely and so specifically. Not in the abstract, warm way that people speak of love, but in the concrete, particular way. This man, and his pencil behind his ear, and the gray jumper, and the steadiness she has leaned on for 18 years. This boy who runs before sunrise and carries secrets, and whose eyes in certain light are the color of gold. This girl whose hands are always ink-stained and whose dreams are full of wolves. She loved them, and she was about to become someone different. She did not know yet exactly what that meant. Ashvale had been established in 1743. The founding family, the family whose name appeared on the original land grants and the early parish records, and the handwritten account of the town's establishment that some conscientious local historian had typed up and posted online in 2009, was named Voss. She read the account very carefully. The Voss family, it said, had come from somewhere in northern Europe. The records were imprecise on this point, the way records from 1743 often were. They had settled the land at the edge of the old forest and established what would become the town of Ashvale. They were described, in the careful language of historical record, as a prominent and influential family who maintained strong connections to the surrounding land. The forest, several records noted, had always been considered Voss territory. In one account, the most detailed, written by a local vicar in 1798 and preserved in the county archive,
she understood now. Sitting at her kitchen table at 1 a.m, with the county archive open on her laptop and the house quiet around her, and the forest at the back of the garden silent and watchful and present. With a certainty so complete it required no further evidence. It had never been a coincidence. Not for a single day of her life. It had always been exactly what it was. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. And then she became aware, slowly, the way you become aware of something that has been there all along, but that you have only just allowed yourself to register, of the date. She had a small calendar on the kitchen wall beside the fridge. She looked at it. She counted forward. The full moon was 4 days away. She did not know.
She went back to Thessaly the next morning. She did not call ahead. She did not consider whether the shop was open or whether Thessaly had other customers or whether this was a convenient time. She drove across town with both hands on the wheel and her jaw set, and parked outside Wren's, and walked through the door, and the small bell above it chimed. And Thessaly looked up from behind the counter, and her face did something complicated and immediate, something that moved through several things at once before settling into a stillness that was not calm, but preparation. There was one customer in the shop, an older woman examining a display of tinctures near the window. Seraphine waited. She stood just inside the door with her coat still buttoned and her bag over her shoulder, and she waited with a patience that was not patience at all, but its opposite, the absolute stillness of someone who was. She came out from behind the counter. She locked the front door and turned the sign. She drew the curtain across the window. She moved through the back of the shop into the small room behind it, a room Seraphine had been in 100 times over 12 years of friendship. A room with 2 armchairs and a low table and a small wood-burning stove, and shelves covering every wall from floor to ceiling, lined with jars and books and objects whose purposes Seraphine had always assumed were decorative, and was now, with the particular clarity of the last several weeks, beginning to reconsider. Thessaly put the kettle on. Her hands, Seraphine noticed, were not entirely steady. In 15 years of knowing this woman, Seraphine had never seen Thessaly's hands shake. She had seen her calm in situations that would have undone most people. She had seen her steady in grief and in crisis, and in every ordinary difficulty that life places in the path of a person.
Her name, Thessaly began, and her voice was quiet and careful and completely without preamble, was Mira Voss. She told it slowly. There was no other way to tell it. Some things cannot be compressed without being destroyed. Their weight is in their detail. Their truth is in the telling of every part of them. And to rush any of it would be to diminish what it cost, and what it meant, and what it had taken 40 years to finally be able to say out loud in a room with the person who needed most to hear it. So she told it slowly. And Seraphine sat in the armchair across from her, and did not interrupt, and did not ask questions, and held her cup of tea with both hands, and listened with every part of herself. Mira Voss, the last true alpha of the Ashvale pack. Born into the bloodline that had led this territory since 1743, since before the town existed, since before there were streets and houses, and a church with a clock 5 minutes slow, and a bakery on the corner of Marin Street. Born into a lineage so old and so deep that the forest itself recognized it. The most powerful lichen born in 3 generations, not just in strength.
They had 3 years together. Thomas knew what Mira was. She had told him on the 3rd date, which Thessaly said was exactly the kind of decision Mira made, clean and direct and without apology. Take it or leave it. He had taken it. He had loved her completely and without reservation, and he had understood that the forest and the pack and the moonlit world his wife moved through were as real and as hers as the house they shared and the life they built in the ordinary daylight hours. And then Seraphine was born. Thessaly paused here. She looked into her cup for a moment. When she continued, her voice was different, lower, more careful, like someone walking terrain they know is unstable. The elders saw it immediately, she said, the moment you were born.
There was a faction. She used that word, faction, with a care that suggested she was choosing it deliberately, that the words she might otherwise reach for were too large or too loaded, or too close to something she needed to keep at a controlled distance in order to get through what she still had to say. An ancient group, older than the Ashvale pack, older than most of the lichen structures that existed in this part of the world. A group who held, with the absolute conviction of people who have held a belief for so long that it has fused with their identity, that they cannot separate what they believe from what they are, that the purity of the lichen bloodline was the only thing that mattered, that mixing with human blood was a weakening, a corruption, that the pack structure existed to protect and strengthen the bloodline, and that any deviation from this was not just wrong, but dangerous. They had accepted Mira's marriage to Thomas, barely, distantly, with the Mira's response, Thessaly said, and something moved briefly across her face that Seraphine recognized even through all the strangeness of everything else as love, the specific and irreplaceable love of someone describing a person they have lost, was exactly what you would expect from Mira. She sent word back that she would be interested to see them try. A pause. Something almost like a smile on Thessaly's face, gone as quickly as it came. She was not afraid of them. She should have been more afraid of them than she was. That was the only way in which Mira was ever less than entirely right about something. She underestimated how far they were willing to go. They came when you were 3 years old. Thessaly put her cup down on the table.
From a source inside their faction. Someone who was not willing to be part of what was being planned. I was told they were coming. I was told when, and I was told how many, and I was told what they intended. The room was very quiet. I had a choice, Thessaly said. Her voice had gone completely flat. Not emotionless, the opposite of emotionless. Emotion so total it had passed through expression and come out the other side as stillness. I could go to Mira, tell her what was coming, stay and fight beside her, as her beta, as was my duty, as was everything I had sworn to be for her. If we had fought together, we might have helped them. I believe we might have helped them. Mira was... You have to understand what she was, what she could do. She was extraordinary.
It stayed completely even, the way a voice does when the person using it has said this thing to themselves so many times in the dark that they have worn all the expression out of the words, leaving only the bare bones of the truth. I saved you, she said, and I have never forgiven myself for what that cost. The room was completely silent. Seraphine looked at the woman across from her. She had known this woman for 12 years. She had sat in this room with her 100 times. She had told her things she had told no one else. She had trusted her with the ordinary, precious currency of a close, new and enormous truth. Her mother had not abandoned her. Her mother had not simply disappeared, had not walked away from a 3-year-old daughter and never looked back, which was the story the absence had always told, even when no one said it out loud. The story that lives in every child who grows up without a parent, whispered under everything else, regardless of what the adults in their lives say to the contrary. She had believed that story in some deep and wordless part of herself for 40 years, without ever consciously examining it. She had built things on top of it. Her self-sufficiency, her rational detachment, her ability to feel complete in herself, her quiet resistance to needing things she might not get. She had built her entire adult personality in ways she was only now beginning to see, around the shape left by a mother who she had believed chose to go, had known. Every coffee, every conversation, every ordinary Tuesday of 12 years of friendship, had known everything that Seraphine did not know about herself, had sat across from her in this room and listened to her talk about her life and her family and her ordinary, incomprehensible ordinariness, and had known all of it, all along. She became aware that she was shaking, not her hands, all of her, a deep internal tremor that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with the sensation of the ground, the actual ground, the foundation, the thing you stand on to stand on everything else, shifting beneath her feet. Was any of it real? She said. Her voice came out strange,
unfamiliar, like hearing a recording of yourself and not quite recognizing it. Was any of it?
Every moment was real, Thessaly said, and her voice was not the controlled, careful voice it had been for the last hour. It was just her voice, raw and direct and completely without strategy. I came to Ashvale because I was sworn to protect you. That is true. I found the shop and I built the life here and I positioned myself close enough to watch over you because that was the promise I made to Mira that night, that I would spend whatever was left of my life making sure her daughter was safe. That is also true. She leaned forward slightly. And then I met you. And you were exactly what she would have been. Exactly. The warmth of you and the stubbornness of you and the way you love the people you love with your whole self and the way you teach those children like every single one of them matters. And they do to you. A tear. One. Moving down Thessaly's face with the slow certainty of something that has been held back for a very long time and has finally found its moment. Every moment was real. I love you. That was never the assignment. That was just the truth. The room held them both. The fire burned low. Outside, through the curtained window, Ashvale went on being Ashvale. Ordinary and beautiful and complete. Seraphine did not know how long they sat there. Long enough for the tea to go cold and the fire to need another log of dusk. Long enough for the shaking to stop and something harder and quieter to settle in its place. She was not the same woman she had been when she walked through that door this morning. She understood this with a clarity that was almost peaceful, the particular peace that sometimes arrives on the other side of something devastating, not because the devastation is over, but because there is nothing left to brace against. The thing you feared most has happened. You are still here. The ground is different beneath your feet, but it is. Mira had performed it herself. The night before the faction came, the night she understood that they were coming and that she was going to make the choice she was going to make. She had taken her 3-year-old daughter and she had performed an ancient ritual, one of the oldest in the Lycan records, that sealed the child's Lycan nature completely. Not suppressed it, not hidden it, sealed it. A blood seal, using Mira's own alpha blood. It worked by containing the Lycan energy so completely that no Lycan could sense it. The rival faction tracked through Lycan energy. It was how they hunted, how they found their targets. A sealed Lycan was invisible to them. Seraphine would read as entirely human to any Lycan who looked for her. She would feel entirely human to herself. She would live an entirely human life for as long as the seal held. How long was it designed to hold? Seraphine asked. Until your 40th birthday, Thessaly said. Mira chose that deliberately. She calculated. No, I didn't think so. She sat with that for a moment. Then she looked at Thessaly directly. I need you to tell me one more thing. Thessaly waited. Who killed my mother? The question came out clean and level and without any of the emotion that lived directly behind it, pressing hard against the back of it, because she needed the answer before she could afford to feel the full weight of what the answer meant. Who gave the order? Who discussed for it? A grief, a fury, controlled, always controlled, but there, always there underneath everything he has built in this town, and has been holding it by force ever since, holding your pack, the Ashvale pack, in a grip that has nothing to do with leadership and everything to do with fear. She looked at Seraphine. Someone who has known for 6 weeks that the seal broke, who has had his scouts watching you since the night of your birthday, who knows exactly who you are and exactly what your bloodline means for everything he has built in this town in the 40 years since he gave the order that took your mother from you.
Seraphine held very still. "His name," Thessaly said. And she said it. And the name landed in the room like a stone through glass, clean and irreversible, and changing the shape of everything it touched. Then your voice.
The transformation had already begun. Thessaly had told her this, had said it plainly, without softening it, because there was no kind way to say it, and Mira's daughter deserved the truth without softening. The seal was broken. The bloodline was waking. The process that had started on Seraphine's 40th birthday was not a process that could be paused or reconsidered or managed back into something comfortable. It was not a crisis. It was not a disease. It was not something being done to her. It was her. 40 years of her, the truest and most ancient part of her, finally, irreversibly coming home. She could not reverse it. She did not know yet whether she wanted to. She drove home through the dark streets of Ashvale with the heater on and the radio off, and Thessaly's words moving through her.
Her daughter was a bloodborn, the most powerful lichen born in a century. And the man who had ordered her mother's death was still here, still in Ashvale, still breathing, still holding a pack that was never his to hold, still alive. She parked in the drive. She sat in the car. She looked at the house, the warm lights in the windows, Callum's shadow moving past the kitchen blind, the blue glow of Lyra's bedroom light, the dark of Rowan's window. He would be asleep already. Early to bed, early to rise. That boy of hers who had been running before sunrise since he was 14, and who spoke in languages she had only seen in a journal she could not
His name was Draven Ashcroft. Thessaly said it the way you say the name of something you have been careful around for a very long time. Not with fear. Thessaly Wren was not a woman who frightened easily, and 40 years of living with what she knew had burned most of the fear out of her and replaced it with something colder and more useful. She said it with the particular careful weight of someone who respects the danger of a thing without being controlled by it. Draven Ashcroft. And she told Seraphine what she needed to know about him. He had been the most powerful beta in Mira's pack. Not alpha. He could never be alpha. And this was the thing about Draven Ashcroft that explained everything else about him. That was the key to understanding every decision he had made in 40 years, every act of control and manipulation and calculated brutality that had followed from it. The alpha bloodline cannot be manufactured. It cannot be earned or seized or transferred. It is born into a person, the way eye color is born into them. It is simply there or it is not, and no amount of ambition or strength or ruthlessness can put it there if it was not there from the beginning. Draven was not born with it. He had known this his entire life. He had known it, and he had built around it.
They had simply found themselves, one by one, in a world where the only other option was worse. And for 40 years, while Seraphine grew up in a house on Voss Lane, believing she was ordinary, while she taught mythology to teenagers and married Callum and raised Rowan and Lyra and forgot to buy milk and laughed too loud at her own jokes, Draven Ashcroft had been here, in Ashvale, running what was hers, holding what he had taken, waiting. He always knew the seal would break eventually, Thessaly said. He could not know exactly when. The specifics of the ritual were between Mira and the old records, and she told no one the details. The silver wolf at the kitchen window, looking at her with what she had read as recognition. What she had felt in response, that absence of fear, that strange sense of being known. That wolf had been sent by the man who ordered her mother's death. She sat with the particular cold clarity of that for a moment. Then she looked at Thessaly. "What does he want?" Thessaly opened her mouth to answer.
and the bell above the shop door rang. They both went still. The shop was locked. The sign said closed. It was gone 8 in the evening, and the street outside was quiet, and there was no reason for anyone to be at that door at this hour. She went through to the front of the shop. Seraphine heard the key in the lock, the door opening. A brief exchange. Thessaly's voice low and controlled. Another voice, younger and male, and deliberately flat. The voice of someone delivering a scripted message and determined not to be drawn beyond it. Then the door closed. The key turned again. Thessaly came back. She was holding a small folded piece of paper. She looked at it for a moment before she held it out to Seraphine. Seraphine took it, unfolded it. The handwriting was precise and unhurried and completely without flourish. The handwriting of someone who was never needed to perform authority because the authority was never in question. She read it once. "Is in 2 days," Thessaly confirmed. Seraphine set the paper down. She looked at the fire. She thought about Callum, about the way he reached for her hand in the dark when she woke gasping from dreams he could not follow her into, about the pencil behind his ear and the gray jumper, and 18 years of the particular steady love of a man who has never once made her feel like she was too much. She thought about Lyra, 15 years old with ink-stained hands and a sketchbook full of wolves she had been drawing since she was old enough to hold a pencil. Lyra whose eyes were beginning to go gold in certain lights. She thought about Rowan. Seraphine. The way Thessaly said her name stopped her. His pack knows every road out of Ashvale, every route, every alternative. They have been here for 40 years. They know this territory the way you know your own house in the dark. She leaned forward. You would be in a car with 2 teenagers who are in the early stages of an emergence they do not yet understand, and a husband who does not yet know what his wife and children are, and you would be attempting to outrun a pack of lichens on their own territory in the dark 2 days before a full moon? She held Seraphine's gaze. That is not a plan. That is a death sentence. For all of you. The fire burned. The paper sat on the table between them. The full moon. She pulled into the drive. She sat for a moment. Then she heard it. From upstairs, faint, through the closed windows and the walls of the house, a sound that she identified before she fully processed it. A sound that moved her out of the car and through the front door and up the stairs before she had consciously decided to move. Lyra was crying. Not quietly, not the contained, private crying of a teenager who does not want to be heard. The other kind. The kind that happens when something is frightening enough that the need to cry becomes larger than the ability to suppress it. Seraphine went to her door, knocked once. Lyra. It's me. Silence on the other side. Then, don't come in. I'm coming in, sweetheart. She opened the door. Lyra was sitting on her bed with her back against the headboard and her knees pulled to. Lyra followed her mother's gaze to the bed frame. I was asleep, she said. Her voice was wrecked, the particular roughness of someone who has been crying alone for longer than they should have been. I was having a nightmare and I didn't know I was doing it. I woke up and it was like that. And the pencils, I was just holding them. I was just sitting here. I wasn't trying to. She stopped, looked at her hands. Those 15-year-old hands that were ink-stained at the fingertips from a lifetime of drawing wolves and forests and moons she saw in her dreams. Mom, she said. And in that one word was everything. The fear and the confusion and the desperate need for someone to tell her that there was a framework for what was happening to her, that it had a name, that she was not losing her mind, that someone in her world had a map to this territory.
Seraphine crossed the room. She sat on the bed beside her daughter.
And she made a decision. Not in words, not in the form of a statement or a declaration or a moment of dramatic resolve. It did not feel like deciding. It felt like recognizing something that had already been decided, something that was simply there, solid and complete, waiting for her to look at it directly. She would not run. She would not submit. She would not stand in front of Draven Ashcroft and renounce what she was, and hand her children a world in which the man who killed their grandmother was still standing, and still holding everything that was not his to hold. She would not let Lyra face what was coming without a mother who had gone first, who had stood in it, who knew it from the inside and could reach back and
"Something extraordinary," she said, "and I am going to explain all of it, but not tonight. Tonight, I just need you to know that you are safe, and that I am here, and that nothing that is happening to you is wrong. Is it happening to you too?" "Yes," Seraphine said. "Yes, sweetheart, it is happening to me too." Lyra let out a breath, long and She told Callum that night. She had been composing the telling in her head for the entire drive home from Thessaly's shop, across 3 days of knowing things she had not yet given to him, and she had never arrived at a version of it that felt like the right version, because there was no right version. There was no arrangement of words that made this easy or gentle or anything other than what it was. A woman sitting down with the man she loved and dismantling the floor of his understanding of his own life. She waited until the children were in their rooms, until the house was quiet, until Callum had made tea and brought 2 cups to the kitchen table and sat across from her with the reading glasses he had recently.
Callum listened. He was extraordinarily good at listening. It was one of the things she had loved about him from the beginning, that he listened with his entire self, not waiting for his turn to speak, not composing his response while you were still talking, but actually receiving what was being given to him, actually letting it land. She watched it land. She watched his face move through things as she talked, the careful, controlled neutrality of the first minutes, the slight shift when she got to the box and the photograph, the moment when something changed in his eyes as she described the journal and the symbols she had drawn in her sleep. By the time she reached, and then she stopped, and the kitchen was very quiet, and she waited. He looked at the table for a long time. She watched his jaw work slightly, the tell he had, the one only she knew, that meant he was working through something that required a moment before he could speak. "You're telling me our children?" he started, stopped. "Our children are extraordinary," she said quietly. "Yes." The silence that followed was the longest silence of their 18 years together. He looked up at her. She looked back at him. At the face she knew better than any face in the world. At the gray at his temples that had come in the last few years, and that she found more beautiful than she had ever told him. At the pencil that was, yes, 15 years. Not one sick day. "Callum, were you ever going to tell me?" The question came out quiet and level, and without accusation. Or rather, with the specific kind of non-accusation that contains within it the shape of an accusation, the outline of one, the place where one would be if he allowed himself to place it there. "I didn't know," she said. "I promise you with everything I have, I did not know. None of this. I was not keeping this from you. I did not know I had it to keep." He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze and let him look. Let him see her completely. The woman he had loved for 20 years. The woman whose eyes caught the light differently in photographs. Who had never been sick. Who had moved an 80-kilogram bookshelf with one hand and laughed it off in a school corridor. And gone home and made dinner and sat at this table and been complete.
Rowan and Lyra. Yes.
Rowan has been running before sunrise since he was 14. Yes. Something moved across his face that she could not quite name. And then she could. It was the expression of a man who has just had 3 years of small, inexplicable details resolve themselves into a coherent picture. The expression of understanding, arriving, finally, after a long time of almost
stopped being grateful for. The look that said he was going to say the true thing, not the easy thing. Were you going to tell me before the full moon? I am telling you now. That is not the same thing. No, she said. It isn't. And I am sorry for the days I didn't. I was trying to understand it myself first, and that was... I should have brought you with me from the beginning. That was wrong. Another silence. Then his hand moved across the table. It covered hers. Both of his hands around both of hers. The specific warmth and weight of a gesture they had exchanged 10,000 times in 18 years. A gesture so...
She could not sleep. She lay in the dark beside Callum, who had eventually, hours after their conversation, fallen into the deep and total sleep of a man whose body had finally overridden his mind's determination to keep working. And she stared at the ceiling and felt the house around her, the particular weight and warmth of it, her home. The crooked front gate and the herb window box and the corkboard in the kitchen and the third stair that creaked. And all of it, all of the specific and irreplaceable texture of the life she had built in this place with this man. She was not going to lose it. She was going to fight for it. She got up quietly. She wrapped herself in the blanket from the end of the bed, standing at the very edge of the garden, at the fence where the garden met the tree line, exactly where she had stood at the kitchen window and seen the silver wolf that first morning. Standing completely still in the dark, in his pajamas, in the middle of October, with his breath making small clouds in the cold air, and his hands at his sides, and his posture not the posture of a 17-year-old boy standing in a cold garden at midnight, but the posture of something older and more certain than that. And in front of him, on the other side of the fence, just inside the tree line, a wolf. One of Draven's scouts. She recognized the size of it, the way it stood. Not the stillness of a hunting animal or a frightened one, but the deliberate, watchful stillness of something with a purpose and an intelligence behind its eyes. It was looking at Rowan. Rowan was looking at it. The language she could not consciously read, but that her chest recognized, like a song she had forgotten she knew. The wolf held still for a moment. Then it lowered its head. Then it turned, and it moved back into the trees with the smooth, unhurried movement of something that has received a clear instruction from a clear authority and is acting accordingly. Rowan lowered his hand. He stood at the fence for a moment longer. Then he turned to go back inside. He did not look up at his mother's window. He had not looked up once. And yet, as he turned away from the fence and walked back across the frost-pale grass toward the house, there was something in the set of his shoulders, some barely perceptible adjustment that told her he had known she was there, that he had known she was watching. That himself the whole time, this serious, private, extraordinary boy of hers, who had been waiting, she understood now with a clarity so complete it almost took her breath away, for her to be ready. The full moon was tomorrow night. She looked at the tree line, at the dark of the forest beyond the fence, at the sky above it, cloud-covered, the moon invisible behind it. But there, she could feel it, that pull deep in her chest, stronger than it had ever been, stronger than the dreams, stronger than anything she had felt in 40 years of living in a body that had been sealed against its own nature. Tomorrow night, in the midnight. The forest at the edge of Ashvale was not the same forest in the dark that it was in the daylight. In the daylight, it was beautiful in the way that ancient things are beautiful, dense and towering and full of the particular green silence of very old trees that have been standing in the same place for longer than the town beside them has existed. In the daylight, you could walk its edges and appreciate it and feel the cool of it, and still feel, underneath all of that, fundamentally in charge of your own experience of it. In the dark, it was something else. In the dark, it was what it had always actually been. Thessaly walked ahead of her with a certainty that required no torch and no hesitation, moving through the dark between the trees the way someone moves through their own home, by memory and by sense, and by something older than either.
Not the general smell of trees and earth that anyone walking in a forest at night would smell. She could smell it the way a musician hears a piece of music, with full distinction, every layer separate and clear and present. The specific cold of pine resin, the deep mineral smell of wet earth after 3 days without rain, the particular living smell of bark and root, and the slow chemical conversation that trees have with each other underground through root systems that have been talking for 100 years. She could smell a stream somewhere ahead of her that she had not been told was there. She could smell the frost forming on the grass in the field beyond the eastern edge of the trees. She could smell the moon.
The clearing was circular, perfectly, intentionally circular, the kind of shape that does not happen by accident in a forest, that requires either the deliberate work of human hands or something else, something older, something that operates by rules that have nothing to do with human intention. The grass inside it was short and dark and covered in frost that caught the moonlight and held it, so that the whole clearing seemed to be made of cold light, as though the moon had pressed itself into the ground here and was still glowing from beneath the surface. Thessaly stopped at the edge. Seraphine walked to the center. She stood there, and the moon rose above the trees. It was the moon.
It began as warmth. The moonlight touched her upturned face, and it felt like warm water, like being submerged very slowly in something that was exactly the right temperature. The temperature of blood, the temperature of the inside of the body, the temperature of something that belonged to her and had been kept away from her and was now, finally, being returned. It moved across her face and down her throat, and it was not light at all. It was recognition. It was the moon looking at her bloodline the way a river looks at the sea, when it finally reaches it after a very long journey through country that was never quite its home. She felt it move into her chest. And here is where the warmth changed. Not into pain, not yet. Into something that had no name in any language she had ever studied or taught. Something deeper than pain. Something that existed in the substrate beneath sensation. In the place where the body keeps its most essential memories. Like a heartbeat. That was the closest she could get to it. Like a heartbeat that had been beating at half its true speed for 40 years. Laboring along.
Your mother was afraid the first time too, Thessaly said. She stood in this exact spot, right where you are standing, and she was afraid. And then she let go, and she was never afraid again. What if I lose myself? The words came out smaller than she intended, more honest than she had planned. The voice of a woman who has spent 40 years building a self from the materials available to her. Rationality, intelligence, love, work. The particular careful architecture of a life constructed without access to the foundation it was actually built on. And who is now standing in a clearing in the dark,
being asked to trust that the thing she is about to become is not the end of the thing she has been. A pause.
She had thought she was prepared. She was not prepared. It moved through her spine first, a deep and total seizing, like every vertebra deciding simultaneously to renegotiate its position. She dropped to her knees. The frost-cold ground came up hard against her hands. Her spine arched. Her head went back. The sound that came from her throat was not a scream. It was something that had never needed a human word before, because it had never been able to get out. The clearing tilted around her. The moonlight blazed. "Don't fight it," Thessaly's voice, close now, closer than before, as though she had moved to the edge of the clearing, as close as she was permitted to come without interfering with something that had to happen alone, that had always been going to happen alone, because that was the nature of it. That was the rule of it. "Don't fight it, Seraphine."
The scar on her collarbone blazed, silver, brilliant, so bright that it lit the clearing from within her, a light that came from beneath her skin and passed through it like moonlight through water, like something that had been compressed into that small crescent mark for 40 years, suddenly remembering that it was not a mark at all, that it had never been a mark, that it was a door, that Mira had put it there not to scar her daughter, but to seal her, to keep safe inside her the most precious and powerful thing Mira had to give. Until now. Something tore open inside her, like a door being taken off its hinges, not with violence, but with the simple, unstoppable authority of something that was always meant to be open, and had simply been waiting for the right hands, the right time, the right moon hanging enormous and silver above the right clearing on the right night. The light from the scar expanded. It reached the edges of the clearing. It reached the trees. And then, silence. Complete. Total. The kind of silence that is not an absence of sound, but a presence of something so much larger than sound, that sound simply steps aside. She was no longer on her knees. She was standing. The first time in 40 years of living inside a body that had been sealed against its own nature, that feeling was simply and completely gone. She stood in the center of the clearing, and she was enormous. Silver-furred, the exact silver of the photograph, the exact silver of the woman with her eyes who had stood at the edge of this same forest and looked directly into a camera with the expression of someone who knew the precise weight of what they were. Every hair catching the moonlight with a cold luminescence that was not reflected but inherent, as though the silver was not a color but a quality, as though it was woven into the nature of her the way the alpha bloodline was woven into her blood. Her eyes burned gold. Not the uncertain, flickering, almost gold that Lyra's eyes were becoming, not the surprised gold of something newly discovered. She ran. There was no decision involved. She ran the way breathing happens, because not running was no longer a possibility, because her body had spent 40 years waiting for this, and was not going to spend one more second standing still when the forest was here and the night was here, and every sense she possessed was open and blazing and demanding to be used. She ran. Through the trees at a speed that made the world blur at the edges, the trunks flickering past her like frames of something, like the forest was a film running slightly too fast. The ground came up to meet her feet and left before she could feel it properly. The air split around her and closed behind her, and she was moving through it like something the dark had been making room for all along. Every sense was open. The smell of the forest hit her in layers. Pine resin, sharp and clean above everything else, then the deep mineral earth, then the living smell of bark and root, and the slow breathing of the trees. Not in fear,
in recognition. She ran, and the forest made way for her. And 40 years of containment, 40 years of being sealed into something smaller than she was, of living at half her true speed, of reaching for a feeling she could never quite locate and coming up empty every time, 40 years of that poured out of her with every stride, released into the dark air of the forest she had been born to run through, and was finally running through. She did not know how long she ran. Time was different here. In this form, in this night, in this forest that knew her name before she knew it herself, time moved differently. Not slower, not faster, simply differently. The way time moves. The second clearing. Smaller than the first, tucked deeper into the forest, further from the town, in a place where the trees were oldest and largest, and had been standing long enough to remember things that no living person remembered. The grass here was not frosted. It was soft and dark and alive, as though this particular piece of ground was kept slightly warmer than its surroundings by something that had been sitting at its center for a very long time. She stood in the middle of it. She looked up at the full moon, and something happened in her chest that she had no framework for and needed no framework for. Something that was simply the end of a very long journey, arriving at the place it had always been going to arrive at. The hum was gone. The constant low background hum of something wrong, something not fitting, something existing at the wrong frequency. The thing she had lived with for so long that she had stopped hearing it as a sound and had simply integrated it as a quality of her own existence. The way you stop hearing a clock on the wall.
Human. Still working harder than they needed to. Still breathing hard from running a distance that she herself had covered in a fraction of the time. She turned. Thessaly emerged from between the trees into the clearing. She stopped. She looked at Seraphine, standing in the center of the small clearing in the moonlight, silver and gold and enormous, and more herself than she had ever been in 40 years of Thessaly knowing her.
All of it at once, the grief and the love and the guilt and the 40 years of watching from a careful distance, and the relief, the enormous, staggering relief of finally seeing the thing she had been working towards since the night she had run through the dark with a 3-year-old child in her arms and left her best friend behind to face something alone that she should never have had to face alone. All of it on her face at once. Unguarded. Complete. She pressed one hand over her mouth. Her eyes were full. And she said, the forest that had known this bloodline before the town beside it existed, that had been waiting in its patient and permanent way for this exact night, this exact clearing, this exact woman standing in the moonlight, finally wearing her own face for the first time. The forest was still. Not the stillness of something waiting. The stillness of something that has been answered. Everything else, like coming home. Hold it. Hold it for a long time. Let it breathe. Let the audience sit inside this moment and feel the full weight and beauty of it. They were not alone. She knew it before she saw them. Felt it the way she now felt everything, not with her mind, but with something older and deeper than her mind. A shift in the weight of the forest around them. A change in the quality of the dark between the trees. Then they emerged.
Watching the transformation from the shadows. Watching her become what she was. Every second of it. Witnessed.
Seraphine did not run. She did not decide not to run. There was no decision involved, no moment of courage she had to reach for. Something in her blood simply did not have the instinct for retreat in the face of a challenge. It was not there. It had never been there. It was the one thing Draven Ashcroft's 40 years of waiting had failed to account for. That the bloodline he feared was not only powerful in what it could do, but in what it could not be made to do. It could not be made to back down. She stood in the center of the clearing and faced the ring of them, and she was completely still. And then, the ring parted. He was older than she had imagined him. Powerfully built, the kind of build that speaks not of youth, but of decades of maintained strength, of a body that has been a weapon for so long it no longer remembers being anything else. Silver at his temples, a face that was not cruel in its...
He had not ended it. It was standing in front of him. "You have your mother's eyes," he said. His voice was even, almost conversational. The voice of a man who has decided in advance how this meeting will go, and is not yet prepared to revise that decision. She was stubborn, too. "Tell me how she died." A pause. Brief. He had not expected the directness of it. Or rather, he had expected it, and had prepared for it, and was experiencing, for just a moment, the slight recalibration of someone who prepared for something in the abstract and is now meeting it in its full specific reality. Then he told her. All of it. Without softening, and without apology, and without the defensive posturing of a man who doubts himself. He told her because he had never doubted, and he did not doubt now. His conviction was the kind that has calcified over 40 years into something indistinguishable from certainty. And certainty of that age and density does not feel the need to protect itself from scrutiny. He had believed then. He believed now. A bloodborne carrying human blood.
He had given the order. He had never lost a single night of sleep over it. And I would do it again, he said. The rage that moved through Seraphine was not like anything she had felt in 40 years of human emotion. It was not hot. It was not the bright, sharp anger of a person who has been wronged in a way they can immediately articulate. It was cold and vast and ancient. Tectonic, the way the movement of the earth is tectonic. Slow and total, and operating on a scale that makes human timekeeping irrelevant. It moved through her like a tide moving through the earth itself, not on the surface, but through the bedrock, through the deepest and oldest layers of what she was. And with it, and this was the thing she had not expected, the thing that came alongside the rage like a second wave behind the first, came authority. A presence that radiated from her bloodline the way heat radiates from the sun. Not directed, not aimed, simply emanating, filling the clearing, reaching every lichen standing in the ring around her with the specific and inescapable biological weight of what she was. She watched it happen. Around the clearing, one by one, then faster, then all at once, they knelt. Not by choice, not by decision, by something that preceded both of those things. The deep instinctive response of a lichen body to a true alpha bloodline. A response written into them at a level below conscious thought, below loyalty, below 40 years of fear and conditioning under Draven Ashcroft's authority. They knelt the way flowers turn toward the sun. Because something in the fundamental nature of what they were simply could not do otherwise in the presence of what she was.
That, he said, and his voice was still controlled, still even, still the voice of a man who had decided in advance how this would go. But there was something underneath the control now that had not been there before, something that he was working to keep contained. Is a trick of genetics. It does not make you ready to lead.
He stepped forward. "I invoke formal challenge," he said. The words were precise and old, the language of lichen law, the structure of it, the rules that governed dominance and authority in the pack hierarchy. Dominance battle. Under the old law, winner takes the pack and the territory. Loser accepts exile. He looked at her. Or death. Thessaly was beside her in an instant, her hand on Seraphine's arm, her voice low and urgent, and stripped of everything except the fear inside it. "Seraphine, you have been in your lichen form for less than an hour. He has been doing this for 40 years. He knows every technique, every counter, every... Please, this is not the moment. There will be another." Seraphine looked at her. One look. Long enough to say everything that needed to be said, without saying... He was not trying to destroy her quickly. He was trying to exhaust her. Systematically, methodically, using his superior experience the way an architect uses load calculations, working out exactly how much pressure to apply where in order to bring the structure down. She was new to this form. She had been in it for less than an hour. Her instincts were extraordinary. The bloodline gave her that, gave her the deep, ancient knowledge of what her body could do that no amount of training could replicate. But instinct without experience has gaps in it. And Draven was 40 years of experience, finding those gaps with surgical patience. She fought on instinct and bloodline and something that was not strategy, but was more than just fury. The specific, focused energy of a woman who has been running toward this moment for 40 years without knowing she was running toward it, who has arrived at it with everything she has, who has absolutely nothing held back. The clearing was not quiet. The forest around it, and then his jaws were at her throat. The clearing went completely silent. Not the active silence of things waiting, the held silence of things that have stopped breathing. Thessaly made a sound, a single sound, small and total and involuntary. The sound a person makes when they see something they have been afraid of for a very long time actually happening. Draven's jaws at her throat. The full moon above them both. The pack kneeling at the edges of the clearing, trembling. And here is what was happening in each of them in that moment, in the wordless biological language of what they were. They were being torn apart. She stood. She crossed the clearing. She placed herself behind Seraphine. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession, moving from the kneeling ring to stand behind the pinned alpha with the specific, deliberate movement of creatures making a choice that they understand the full cost of and are making anyway. Draven felt it. She felt him feel it. In the slight change of his weight, the microsecond of his attention moving from her to the pack fracturing behind him. The single second of divided focus that his 40 years of experience had never had to account for, because no one had ever challenged him with a bloodline strong enough to fracture his pack in real time around him. Precise. 1 second. A parting act not of desperation, but of pure, unrepentant conviction. The fining statement of a man who has never doubted himself and is not going to begin now. He marked her. Across the left shoulder, deep and certain, a wound laid with the specific intention of a scar. Not a battle wound, a mark. Something that would heal, but would not disappear. Something she would carry on her body for the rest of her life as a reminder that he had been here, that he had not gone quietly, that he had stood in front of everything she was and everything she represented, and he had not knelt. She did not make a sound. She stood over him in the moonlight, silver and gold and bleeding, and she looked at him, and she felt not triumph. Triumph was too small for this, too thin. But something that was almost, the beginning of respect.
buried under everything else, under the conviction and the cold certainty and the 40 years of absolute belief in his own rightness. But there, just barely there. "This is not over," he said. "The ones who gave me the order to kill your mother, they are not wolves, girl. They are not going to kneel for your bloodline." A pause. "They are already watching." He turned. He walked into the dark between the trees and was gone. The clearing was silent. The pack, what remained of it, the ones who had knelt and the ones who had stood and the ones who had fractured, it was hers. The scar was hers. The night was hers. The clearing and the forest and the pack standing silently around her, hers. She was bleeding and shaking, and she had been in her lichen form for less than 2 hours, and she had fought a man who had been doing this for 40 years. And she was still standing. And he... A long breath, and then your voice returns, warmer than it has been at any point in this story. Quieter, like someone arriving somewhere they have been traveling toward for a very long time. Dawn came slowly to Ashvale, the way it always did in October. Not all at once, but in layers. Something as though it understands that certain nights deserve a proper ending before the day begins. She walked home through the forest in human form, alone. Thessaly had offered to walk with her, and she had said no. Not unkindly, not with distance, but with the simple, certain knowledge that this particular walk needed to be taken alone. That this was part of it, the walking back. The choosing, with each step through the ancient dark of the forest, to return to the house and the life and the people waiting in it. Not because the forest was something to leave behind, not because it puzzled Dr. Ellison and puzzled her, and that she now understood was simply her body doing what her body had always been capable of doing, working at its true speed, without apology. The wound was closing, but it would scar. She could feel that too. The particular quality of certain injuries that know from the beginning they are going to leave a mark, that are not trying to erase themselves, but to become something permanent and carried. She was glad. She walked through the thinning dark, with the scar forming on her shoulder, and the frost-cold ground under her bare feet, and the forest making its slow transition from night sounds to morning sounds around her. The first birds, somewhere high in the canopy, beginning the tentative opening notes of the dawn. And she felt more completely herself than she had felt at any point in 40 years of living inside a body that had been sealed against its own nature. The back gate was unlatched. She pushed through it into the garden, crossed the frost-pale ground. He took in all of it, the dirt on her hands, the state of her clothes, the new scar visible above the collar of her shirt, the particular quality of her stillness, which was not the stillness of exhaustion or defeat, but something entirely different, something he had perhaps never seen in her before, and was reading, with the careful attention of a man who has loved someone for 20 years and knows every register of them, for the first time. He did not speak. He crossed to the counter. He filled the kettle. He made 2 cups of coffee with the focused, quiet efficiency of a man who has decided that the most useful thing he can do in this moment is this ordinary, specific, completely human thing. He put 1 cup in front of her. He sat across from her with his own. She told him what had happened in the forest. All of it. The clearing, the transformation, what it had felt like. She tried to give him that, the actual feel. She held the question. She did not answer it quickly or deflect it or turn it into something easier than what it was. The most important question he could have asked, the question underneath all other questions, the one that contained their entire life together in its 4 words. She thought about it honestly, about the woman she had been yesterday morning and the woman she was now, about everything that had been taken apart in the last 6 weeks and everything that had been put back together differently, about the clearing and the moonlight and the feeling, that feeling of something that had been wrong for 40 years suddenly being right, about her mother's silver in her fur and her mother's name written in faded ink on the back of a photograph, about the fact that she was sitting at her kitchen table with dirt on her hands and a new scar on her shoulder and a cup of coffee in front of her, and she felt, and they were sitting at the kitchen table in the early morning light, and he was still here. It was real, and it was enough. She went upstairs. Lyra's door was open. She was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with her sketchbook open across her knees and the bedside lamp on, and her hair still tangled from sleep, and her ink-stained hands moving with that focused, automatic certainty across the page. She looked up when Seraphine appeared in the doorway. Seraphine looked at the sketchbook. The page Lyra had been drawing, the page she had been working on through the early hours of the morning while her mother had been in the forest becoming herself, was a forest, a clearing, a full moon hanging enormous. Seraphine crossed the room. She sat on the bed beside her daughter. She took her hand, those ink-stained hands, those hands that had been drawing this moment since she was old enough to hold a pencil, that had been carrying the image of it in her blood before she had any conscious understanding of what she was drawing. "Yes," she said. Lyra looked at the drawing, then at her mother, then at her own hands. "Am I going to—" "Yes." The word came out gentle and certain, and without hesitation, without the hedging or the softening or the careful management of information that she had been doing for weeks. No more of that. No more of the distance that protecting people from the truth creates between you and the people you love. "Yes, when you are ready, and not one moment before you are ready. And you will be ready, because I am going." Then she leaned in. She rested her head against her mother's shoulder, the uninjured one, with the instinctive gentleness of someone who is more attuned to the people around her than she perhaps knows. And Seraphine put her arm around her daughter, and they sat together in the lamplight of the early morning, with the sketchbook open between them and the silver wolf looking up at the moon from the page. 2 women at the edge of becoming. One who had just arrived, one who was just beginning. The morning light came through the curtains and fell across them both, and was very, very gold. She went to Rowan's room last. She had known, walking down the hallway toward it, that he would be awake. She had known it the same way she knew things now, not with her mind, but with the older and deeper thing that had been given back to her last night in a clearing in the ancient forest at the edge of Ashvale. He heard her come in without turning around. She stood in the middle of the room. "How long?" she asked quietly. A pause. The kind of pause that contains something, a decision about how much to give, made quickly and resolved in favor of the whole truth. "Since I was 14. 3 years. She absorbed it, stood with it, let it settle into her without trying to immediately make something of it, without the guilt or the grief or the complicated maternal mathematics of trying to calculate how much of it she should have seen and didn't. He had been 14, and he had been running before sunrise every morning, and he had been carrying this completely alone for 3 years, and she had not known. She crossed the room. She put her hand on his shoulder. He turned to look at her. And his eyes, in the morning light coming through the window behind him, in the specific pale gold of an October dawn,
were gold. Not the new, uncertain gold of Lyra's eyes, still finding their way.
And I needed you to be ready. She stared at her son. This quiet, serious, impossibly wise 17-year-old boy of hers. This boy who ran before sunrise and read ancient history and spoke in languages that predated the town they lived in and had been standing guard at the garden fence in the dark for 3 years, standing between his mother and a world she didn't yet know existed, making sure it could not reach her before she was ready to meet it. He had been protecting her. Her 17-year-old son had been protecting her. She pulled him into a hug. He went stiff, the automatic resistance of a teenage boy, the reflex of someone who has been self-contained for so long that being held requires a moment of relearning. She held on. She did not let go. And after a moment, after the stiffness passed through him like a wave and broke and receded, he held on too, completely. His arms around her, his face against her shoulder. Her son, her extraordinary, impossible, gold-eyed son who had been waiting, patiently, faithfully, with a love so steady it had never needed to announce itself.
For all of them were watching her, with the mixture of things that she was going to have to learn to carry, awe and hope, and the particular weight of expectation that comes with being what she was to these people. Thessaly stood at the front of them. She looked at Seraphine, and for the first time, for the very first time in the entire story of them, in 12 years of friendship and 40 years of duty, and all the weight of guilt and love and sacrifice and devotion that had lived between those two things, Thessaly Wren smiled. Fully. Without the shadow of guilt that had lived behind every expression she had worn in all the time Seraphine had known her. Without the careful management of a woman who has been keeping something enormous at a controlled distance for so long, it has become the primary shape of her face. Without weight. Just smiling. The way you smile when something you have been working toward for 40 years finally, completely, arrives. She lowered her head. Alpha, she said. The word landed in the late afternoon air of Voss Lane with the specific weight of something that has been true for a very long time.
The forest that had made room for her last night and would make room for her every night from here forward, not as an intrusion, not as a visitor, but as something that belonged to it the way the roots belong to the earth. The moon was already rising, pale and patient in the darkening sky above the tree line, not yet the full blazing presence it had been last night in the clearing, still early in its rising, still finding its full light, but there, entirely there, present and certain, and pulling at the thing in her chest with that deep tidal pull that she had felt for 6 weeks without understanding it, and would feel for the rest of her life with complete and settled understanding. She was not afraid. She lifted her face to the rising moon.
The truth was never something done to her, never an intrusion, never an imposition, never the destruction of the life she had built. The life she had built was real. Every moment of it was real. The love she had given and received in it was real. The woman she had become inside it was real. The truth was not the end of any of that. The truth was the foundation that had always been beneath all of it, ancient and patient, and strong enough to hold everything she was, the focused love of a man who had chosen to stay, in the room where Lyra was filling a new page of a new sketchbook with images of things she was only beginning to understand she had always known. In the windowsill where Rowan was watching the dusk come in with those gold and steady eyes that had been waiting 3 years for this evening. they knew it too. Music rises, the warmest it has been in this entire story, full and ancient and deeply, completely right. The sound of something that has been broken for 40 years, finally. She won. Seraphine Voss, a woman who 3 weeks ago was grading papers at a kitchen table and forgetting to buy milk and teaching werewolf mythology to teenagers with complete academic detachment, stood in the moonlight of an ancient forest and claimed everything that had been hers since the night she was born. She found her mother, not in the way she had always secretly, wordlessly hoped to find her, not alive, not returned, not undoing the loss that had shaped her entire life from the inside without her ever fully understanding its shape. She found her in the silver of her own fur and the gold of her own eyes, and the particular weight of authority that moved through her bloodline like a tide and brought 20 lichens to their knees without a word spoken. She found her in the clearing that Mira had loved, in the forest that Mira had run through, in the pack that Mira had led, and that was something older. Something that has been watching from a place Seraphine cannot yet see and does not yet know to look for. They watched the seal break on her 40th birthday. They watched her transform in the clearing where her mother once stood. And they are not afraid. They are not scrambling. They are not panicking. They are not sending messengers with ultimatums or wolves to circle houses in the dark. They are interested. A long pause. Let it breathe. Let the weight of it settle into the audience completely. Seraphine Voss just won her first battle. She has absolutely no idea that the war has not yet begun. If this story moved you tonight, if Seraphine's journey hit something real in you, if the moment in the clearing made you catch your breath, if Thessaly's confession broke something open in your chest, if Rowan standing at the fence in the dark with those gold eyes made the back of your neck go cold, if you sat here for 2 hours and did not once want to look away, then you already know what to do. The moon never lies. The blood never forgets. And the story, it is only just beginning. Until next time, dream of the lichen.